The Vreth ships appeared on a Tuesday morning. Not one or two. Not a dozen. 11,000 of them, hanging at the edge of the solar system like a wall built from dark metal and bad intentions. They came in silence, which was almost worse than if they had come screaming. Gwen Harlow was in a Geneva basement when the first reports came through. The room smelled like old coffee and carpet that had lived through better decades. Someone had left a half-eaten sandwich on the table. Nobody touched it. Nobody was thinking about sandwiches. The screens on every wall showed the fleet. All of them. 11,000 ships, sitting still, patient the way only something very large and very sure of itself can be patient. Then the message came. It arrived in 47 languages at once. The Vreth had done their homework on that part. The translation was clean and polished, like something written by someone who had given the speech so many times they had stopped feeling it. The alien War Master's image appeared on every screen, tall, gray-skinned, with eyes the color of old ash. His name was Jacques. He looked like a man filing paperwork. You are addressed by the Vreth Dominion, the translation read. Surrender your leadership. Submit census data. Prepare your populations for integration. Resistance will result in consequences that are both inevitable and disproportionate. This is not a threat. This is information. The room was quiet for a moment. Then everyone started talking at once. Gwen did not talk. She sat in her chair and looked at the screens and listened to the chaos around her with the calm of someone who had already started calculating. She had been a diplomat for 19 years. She had sat in rooms like this before, with different catastrophes on different screens, and she had learned a long time ago that the first few minutes of panic told you almost nothing. The next few hours told you everything. The session ran for 3 hours before she asked her one question. How many of them, she said, loud enough to cut the noise, have actually landed ground troops on a defended world? The room went quiet. People looked at each other. Someone pulled up records. Someone else pulled up more records. The answer was 0. Not one of the 43 civilizations the Vreth Dominion had absorbed had ever made them fight for it on the ground. Every single one had surrendered from orbit within 72 hours of the fleet appearing. Some within 6. Gwen wrote 3 lines on a legal pad. She folded it once and slid it across to Admiral Pete Calloway, who sat to her left. He was 58, built like a man who had spent his whole life expecting bad weather, with gray stubble and eyes that gave nothing away. He read the note. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. He did not look at her. But he nodded, once. The session kept going for 6 more hours. Delegates argued. 2 of them cried. One walked out and came back 20 minutes later and did not explain why. There were proposals and counterproposals and contingency plans, and the word negotiate was used many times. Gwen said very little. When it was over, she was the last one out. She stood in the empty room and looked at the half-eaten sandwich on the table. She picked it up. Threw it in the bin. Then she walked into the hallway and started making calls. 1,400 kilometers away, Cole Maddox was on a base outside Stuttgart when the alert came through. He was in the middle of a set of pull-ups, which was maybe the least dramatic way in history to receive news of an alien fleet. He dropped off the bar. Read the alert twice. Folded his hands on top of his head and looked at the ceiling for about 4 seconds. Hell of a thing, he said to nobody. Cole was 34, Texan in the way that meant he did not talk much and meant every word when he did. He had been a ranger for 11 years. He had done 3 tours in places that did not make the news, and he had buried more men than he could count on both hands. He had stopped counting at some point. Not because he did not care. Because keeping the count was a weight that would have taken him down with it. He went back to his bunk. Read the full briefing. Read it again. Then he went to the range and spent 2 hours there, alone, which was how he thought. He thought about what 11,000 ships looked like in real space. He thought about the phrase, consequences that are inevitable and disproportionate, which was the kind of language used by someone who had never once been surprised by anything. Cole had surprised a lot of people over the years. On the other side of that silence, 11,000 ships away, Jacques sat in his command chamber and waited for Earth's response. He expected it within 24 hours. Every species, without exception, had responded within 24 hours. Most of them had asked just one question, about integration terms, what relocation meant exactly, whether families would be kept together. They were the questions of a species that had already accepted the outcome and was only managing the details. He had a team standing by for that. They were very good at managing details. The 24-hour mark passed. Jacques noted it in his log. Unusual, he wrote, but not alarming. Some species require additional processing time. The 36-hour mark passed. He noted this too. He resent the message in case there had been a transmission error. There had not been a transmission error. Velshon, his communications officer, came to him at the 40-hour mark. She was younger than most of his staff, precise in the way of someone who had learned early that precision was the best kind of protection. No response, War Master, she said. I am aware, he said. Should we advance? He considered this. Advancing before receiving a surrender response was not standard procedure. The standard existed for a reason. It prevented unnecessary damage to infrastructure the Dominion would eventually need. Patience was efficiency. Patience was the lesson 43 conquests had taught him. We wait, he said. At the 48-hour mark, he felt something he could not immediately name. It sat in his chest like a small cold stone. He had felt something like it once, a long time ago, before his very first campaign, when he was young and had not yet learned that outcomes were predictable if you understood the variables well enough. He pushed the feeling aside. He was good at pushing things aside. On the 49th hour, Earth responded. The message was 61 words. Jacques read it. He had his translator read it again. He looked at Velshon. Is there a translation error? He asked. No, War Master, she said. She was very still. He read it a third time. The message did not ask about integration terms. It did not mention families or relocation. It did not contain the word surrender anywhere in its 61 words. What it contained, in language the Vreth algorithm struggled to map cleanly, was something that translated approximately as, we know what you are. We know what you have done. Come find out what that costs. Jacques was quiet for a long time. 43 civilizations, he said. Velshon waited. He did not finish the sentence. He stood up instead and began moving ships into advance formation, and the cold stone in his chest was still there, and this time he did not push it aside because he could not find it anymore. It had already become something else. After Earth sent its message, things moved fast. Not the panic kind of fast, not the stumbling kind, the other kind. The kind that comes from a decision being made so completely that all the noise drops away and what is left is just work. Gwen Harlow was on a plane before the message had finished transmitting. She had 3 phones and she used all of them. She called generals and admirals and engineers and 2 people whose job titles did not exist in any official directory. She spoke to each of them in the same flat, factual voice she used for everything, which was maybe the most alarming thing about her if you were paying attention. She was not asking for opinions anymore. That phase was done. Cole Maddox got his new assignment at 0600. Printed on a single sheet. 4 words, orbital drop, hostile contact. He read it over his coffee. Set it down. Finished the coffee. Then he went and found his unit and they began. He had 72 hours to prepare. He used them the way a person uses a kitchen before a big meal, no motion wasted, everything in its place, doing each thing in the right order. He spent 6 hours at the range, not because he needed the practice but because it was the only place his brain went fully quiet. He spent 14 hours sleeping, in pieces, whenever there was a gap. He ate real food, eggs, toast, bad diner coffee from a place near the base that smelled like it had been open since the 1970s, because he had learned a long time ago to eat well when you still could. He briefed his team at hour 60. 8 people. He had worked with 6 of them before. The other 2 were new, which meant he watched them more carefully, not with suspicion, but with the same attention a mechanic gives a part he has not used before. The briefing ran to about 400 words and he answered questions in about 200 more and then it was done. Hell of a thing, he said at the end, which was not in any official briefing document but which was, in his particular vocabulary, something close to a benediction. 6 of his team understood this. The other 2 were still learning. Nora Briggs got her orders in a hangar at 0300. The hangar was cold and fluorescent and smelled like jet fuel and the particular anxiety of people who had been awake too long. She was standing next to her ship when a junior officer came and handed her the order sheet. She read it. Read it again. The ship she was assigned to fly had been modified in ways she had not been consulted about. The mission profile was not anything that existed in standard doctrine. The operational window was shorter than anything she had ever trained for. "Oh, absolutely not," she said, to nobody in particular. Then she climbed into the cockpit and started checking every system by hand, which was how she processed information she didn't like. Her hands knew what to do even when her head was still catching up. She had flown worse ships. She had been through worse situations. She had come back from Europa when nobody expected her to, which was either a testament to her flying or to the universe having a very specific and inconvenient sense of humor. She chose not to think about Europa. She focused on the pre-flight. The pre-flight was something she could control. By 0500 she had found 2 faults in the modified systems, fixed one herself, and flagged the other for the ground crew. She also wrote a short and very direct note to whoever had designed the modifications, which contained several observations they would probably not enjoy receiving. She felt better after writing the note. She always felt better with something specific to be angry about. On the Vreth flagship, Jacques had moved into advance formation and was waiting for what he expected to come next. In his experience, the pattern was always the same. A species would make some kind of defiant gesture, cultural, verbal, sometimes even a small military display, and then the reality of the fleet would become too large to argue with, and the surrender would follow. The gesture was a way of saving face. He understood it. He respected it in the way you respect something you do not need to take seriously. He had his response team on standby. They were practiced at accepting formal surrenders with enough dignity that the surrendering species did not feel entirely erased. This was important for integration. A species that felt erased was harder to administer. He was reviewing the human response message for the 4th time when Velshan came to him with new data. "War Master," she said. "We are picking up movement from the human planet." "What kind of movement?" She paused. This was unusual. Velshan did not pause. "Military," she said. "Large scale. Multiple launch signatures." She looked at her display. "They are not orienting toward communication relay points. They are orienting toward our forward position." Jacques looked at her. "They are moving toward us," she said, more plainly, because plainness seemed necessary. "How many ships?" The number she gave him was not large. In terms of tonnage and armament, the human fleet moving in their direction was not something his advance force could not handle. On paper it was almost small enough to be insulting. He looked at it on the display anyway for a long time. "What do our behavioral models say?" he asked. Velshan was quiet for a moment. "The behavioral models," she said carefully, "were calibrated on species that surrendered." He understood what she was not saying. "Run them anyway." She ran them. They produced output he could not use. The models kept returning errors in the aggression prediction matrix because the input, a species choosing to advance on a fleet 40 times its size, was outside every parameter the models had been built to handle. The models had a category for suicidal behavior. They had a category for desperation. They did not have a category for what the sensor data was showing, which was something organized, deliberate, and moving at a speed that was not desperate at all. Jacques stood at his viewport and watched the human signatures crossing the display. "Send to the fleet," he said. "Combat readiness. All sections." Velshan moved to do that. Then she stopped. "War Master," she said. "Should I also prepare the formal surrender protocols? In case they are coming to?" "No," he said. She waited. "I do not think they are coming to surrender," he said. The cold stone that had lived in his chest since the 48-hour silence was not a cold stone anymore. He identified the new feeling now. He had read about it in the histories of species the Dominion had absorbed. Most of them had felt it at some point in their own pasts, in their own wars against each other, before the Dominion arrived. The Vreth had never had reason to feel it themselves. He felt it now. It was, he realized, the specific sensation of not knowing what was about to happen. He had not felt this in a very long time. He had forgotten it was a sensation that existed. He stood at the viewport with the human fleet growing on his display, and he held it the way you hold something you have picked up off the ground and are not yet sure whether to put back down. Then he turned from the viewport and began making decisions. There were many decisions to make. The work of it settled over him and he let it, because decisions were something he knew how to do, and the feeling in his chest was something he did not, and for now it was better to focus on what he knew. The human signatures kept moving. Closing the distance. Not slowing. Not stopping. The first thing the Vreth advance fleet saw was Nora's ship. Not her full squadron. Just her, coming out of the dark at a speed their sensors processed half a second after she was already past their outer perimeter. She had not come from the direction their models predicted. She had come from below, relative to the fleet's orientation, a direction they had not prioritized because no ship as small as hers had any real tactical reason to use it. She had several tactical reasons to use it. She had thought them through during pre-flight while her hand was still checking systems. Her first missile went through the center of the Vreth command relay before their point defense had finished locking. She was already in her turn when it hit. She pulled the ship into a roll that she had not been briefed was possible in the modified configuration and found out, in real time, that it mostly was. The ship complained. She told it to stop complaining and kept turning. The comm in her ear was full. Cole's teams, the tactical coordinator, someone from Fleet Command who was trying to run this like a textbook operation and was going to need to let go of the textbook fairly soon. She cut through all of it. Soft flank at bearing 27 Mark IV, she said. They are clustering there. They think we will push from the front. She came up through the debris of the relay she had just destroyed. Don't push from the front. Cole heard her. His drop pod hit the side of the Vreth staging vessel at an angle that was not in the mission profile, because the mission profile had been written before Nora took out the relay and changed the geometry of the whole approach. He adjusted. This was the thing about Cole that his instructors had noticed 11 years ago and that his unit had come to rely on. He was not attached to plans. He was attached to outcomes. The pod punched through the hull. He was moving before the impact finished. His team split into 4 pairs at the first junction, the way they had drilled, and spread through the ship the way water finds cracks. The Vreth aboard were not combat soldiers in any sense Cole recognized. They were administrators. Garrison staff. People trained to manage a conquered population, to process census data, to coordinate relocation logistics. They had weapons. They knew how to fire them. They had never been in a real fight. Cole knew the difference, in the first 3 seconds of any contact, between someone who had been in a fight and someone who hadn't. It was in the hands. In the eyes. In the way they moved when something unexpected happened. Unexpected things kept happening. His team moved through the ship in just under 4 minutes. It was not clean or elegant. From the outside it probably looked like chaos. From the inside it was a series of very fast decisions made by people who had spent years getting good at making very fast decisions. When the staging vessel's command center went dark, Cole marked it and moved to the next objective. On the Vreth flagship, Jacques watched his tactical display. The signatures in the staging vessel were going out one by one. Not in clusters. Not from cascading system failures. One. Then another. Then another. Patient. Regular. Spaced apart like something breathing. He had watched species fight each other before. He had observed, from a safe distance, the final wars of civilizations being absorbed into the Dominion. He had studied the patterns. Most combat, even between aggressive species, had a frantic quality to it. It peaked and then it broke. Either the advance broke or the defense broke and then it was over. This was not breaking. What is the status of the boarding response teams? He asked. Velshan checked. Deployed, she said. They are not. She paused. They are not stopping the advance. How many boarders? She gave him the number. It was small enough that it should not have been worth discussing. He looked at the display for a long time. How, he said, and did not finish the question. In her cockpit, Nora was on her 3rd pass when something clipped her aft stabilizer. Not a direct hit, a ricochet off debris she had put there herself, which felt personal in a way she found specifically annoying. She stabilized. Assessed. The ship was flyable, though it was going to make a sound for the rest of the mission that she chose not to think about. She had been in space for 40 minutes. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate was high but not panicked. This was the thing about Nora that nobody who hadn't flown with her could understand from the outside. She did not get scared in the cockpit. She got focused. Everything that was not the next decision fell away and what was left was clean and fast and very clear. She found the next target. She went toward it. Cole reached the fourth objective when the Vreth response teams finally organized. They came from two directions, which was competent, and they had numbers, which mattered. He pulled his team back to a choke point, a corridor junction where 2 could hold against 10 if the 2 were good enough, and they held it. It was not comfortable. 2 of his people took hits that would need attention. He made a note of this and kept moving. The Vreth response teams were not cowards. He noticed this and filed it. They pushed their advance even when it cost them. They adjusted their approach with each exchange, which meant they were not just following training but actually thinking. He respected this, and it also made things harder. He called Nora. "Second staging vessel," he said. "Can you crack the hull at Junction 7? There is a secondary command node inside." "Define crack," she said. "Enough to get through. Not enough to breach atmosphere." "Oh, that is very specific, Cole. Can you do it?" A pause. "Probably," she said. In Nora's vocabulary, probably meant yes. She did it. It was, technically, not possible with the weapons load she was carrying. But she had worked out a delivery angle in the last 30 seconds that the missile engineer who designed her loadout would have found either very impressive or very upsetting. Possibly both. Cole was through the breach in 3 minutes. When the second command node went dark, Jacques received 3 reports in less than 1 minute. Each of them said essentially the same thing in different words. The human boarding teams were not stopping. The defensive response had not slowed them. The nodes were going dark at the same rhythm as before. He ordered a full pullback of the staging vessels. For the first time in 400 years of campaign history, he was removing assets from a contact zone before receiving a surrender. He stood at his viewport. He watched the human signatures on the display, small, almost absurd in their smallness against his fleet, still moving, still regular, still ticking away at a pace that did not change. "War Master," Velshan said quietly. "Our behavioral projections indicated they would stop after the first vessel." "I know," he said. "They did not stop." "I know," he said. He turned from the viewport. He needed to read. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. The Dominion had records of 43 wars, every species, every contact, every pattern of behavior under pressure. None of it, he was beginning to understand, was going to be useful to him. The Vreth pulled back and went quiet, which was almost worse than if they had kept fighting. Cole set up at a forward position on the outer hull of the captured staging vessel and ate something from a tin while the sector went still around him. The tin contained something that was probably protein-based. He did not examine it closely. He had learned in year 3 of his career that examining field rations closely was a mistake with no upside. Nora landed nearby. Not at a designated landing point. There were no designated landing points on the outer hull of a Vreth staging vessel, but at a flat section she had spotted on approach, which her ship's systems did not technically recognize as a landing surface. The ship landed anyway, because she told it to. She climbed down and came over and sat across from Cole on a section of plating that a structural engineer would have had concerns about. She sat on it anyway. She was still in her flight suit. She had a cut above her left eyebrow that she hadn't noticed yet because there had not been a single moment to notice it. Cole looked at the cut. Looked away. "Hell of a thing," he said. Nora looked out at the dark where the Vreth fleet sat blinking on sensors, 600 kilometers away. 11,000 ships, gone quiet, waiting. "Gorgeous," she said, meaning the opposite. They sat for a while. Neither of them had the kind of personality that needed to fill silence with words. This was something they had worked out about each other in the first hour of the mission, which was fast, but some things you learn fast when the circumstances don't leave room for slow. Cole had lost 2 people. He did not say it because there was nothing to say about it yet. Saying it out loud in those first hours was not something he did. He carried it and put it in the place where he put things when the work was still running, and he would take it out later. He had a lot of things in that place by now. He knew how to carry them without it changing how he walked. Nora had come very close to not coming back, twice. She did not say that either. She also had a place she put things. Gwen Harlow arrived at the forward position while they were still sitting there. Nobody had told Cole she was coming. She appeared the way very organized people appear, without warning or announcement, with a bag over one shoulder and a printed map under her arm. She looked like someone who had been traveling hard for a long time without letting it slow her down. She found them on the hull plating. She sat down. She spread the map, an actual paper map, which was either a backup measure or a personal habit, and she started asking questions. The questions were precise. How did the Vreth respond when a flank collapsed? Did they reinforce the broken section or pull back from it? How fast did their internal response teams move between corridor sections? What happened to their formation cohesion when they lost a command node? Did the nearest node absorb command authority immediately, or was there a gap? Cole answered all of it. Nora filled in the parts he had not seen from the ground. Gwen wrote everything down in small, clean handwriting with a pen from her breast pocket. When she had what she needed, she folded the map, folded the notes, and put them both away. "We push in 36 hours, she said. That was the end of the conversation. Cole watched her walk back across the hull toward the interior access point. Hell of a thing, he said, meaning something completely different than he had meant it before. Nora glanced at him. You say that a lot. It fits a lot of situations, he said. On the Vreth flagship, Jacques had been reading for 16 hours. He had pulled every piece of human data from the Dominion's pre-contact intelligence files. They were thorough in some areas, biology, atmospheric composition, planetary geography, and nearly useless in others. The intelligence team had catalogued human technology and rated it as primitive relative to Dominion standards. This was accurate, and also, Jacques was now realizing, completely beside the point. What they had not catalogued adequately was what humans had spent the last 1,000 years doing to each other. He read that now. All of it he could access. He read about conflicts that had lasted decades, fought between different groups of the same species over things that were sometimes territorial and sometimes based on ideas and sometimes barely explainable at all from an outside view. He read about battles where a smaller force had held against a much larger one because the smaller force had decided, for reasons the historical record described in different ways depending on which human wrote it, that it was simply not going to stop. He kept coming back to that. Not going to stop. He had never needed to think about it before. In 43 campaigns, the question of stopping had never come up because it had never started. The fleet appeared. The math was obvious. They surrendered. It was clean. It was efficient. The Dominion told itself it was humane. He found a phrase in a very old human document, from a small conflict, in a region of the planet that no longer existed in the same political form. He read it twice. He called Velshan and read it to her out loud. She was quiet for a moment. War Master, she said carefully. I think we may have made an error in our threat classification. Yes, he said. A significant one. Yes, he said again. He closed the document and had his tactical team run new projections, not using the behavioral models, which had already proven useless, but based entirely on raw data from the engagement. How fast the boarding teams had moved. How they adapted when a path was blocked. What happened to their pace when they took losses? That last result was the one he sat with the longest. Their pace did not change when they took losses. In every species the Dominion had studied, and they had studied many, because some of them had fought each other before the Dominion arrived, losses slowed momentum. It was a constant. Losing members of a group created a pause. The group needed time to process, reassess, reorganize. This was normal. This was how rational beings behaved under pressure. The human teams had not paused. Not because they were unaffected. The analysis showed there were markers in the comm patterns, in how they moved, that were consistent with stress. They were not machines. They were not numb to what was happening around them. They were doing it anyway. Jacques put both hands flat on the console in front of him and looked at the display where the human signatures were clustered around the captured staging vessel. Small signals. Almost nothing, against the size of his fleet. Still there. He thought about the phrase he had read to Velshan. He thought about 43 campaigns and the assumption behind each of them, that the math of overwhelming force was always the answer because it had always been the answer. He thought about the rhythm of those command nodes going dark. One by one. Patient. Like something that had already decided. Prepare a full assault formation, he said. Velshan looked at him. We are past the standard window for a surrender approach, War Master. I know, he said. She waited. We are past a number of standard approaches, he said. The 36-hour push began at 0200, which was not a coincidence. Gwen had chosen the time deliberately, for reasons she explained to nobody, though Cole had a working theory that it had to do with the breath shift patterns they had observed during the first engagement, a small detail that most people would not have filed and that Gwen had filed immediately. He thought, hell of a thing. Cole's team went in first. 8 people, or 6 now, with the 2 losses from the first engagement replaced by 2 others from reserve who had been briefed in just under 2 hours and were ready, or as ready as anyone can be for something that has no real precedent to prepare for. He moved them through the corridors of the second staging vessel with the same economy he always used, making each decision about 3 seconds before it needed to be made and communicating it in as few words as possible. The Vreth were ready this time. Jacques had reorganized his defensive teams, pulled actual combat-trained personnel from other sections, placed them at the choke points. It was a better defense than the last one. It was not enough. Cole found the better defense and went around it. Not because he had intelligence on where exactly it was set up, he didn't, but because he had been in enough buildings and enough corridors and enough situations where someone was waiting for him to know how people wait. He felt the shape of it. His team moved. The Vreth defensive lines found themselves flanked before they had finished preparing the response to the flanking. Nora was outside. She had been in space for 6 hours already. She was tired in the specific way of someone whose hands are still doing their job even when the rest of her wants to stop. She had a system for this. She narrowed her attention down to just the next thing, the next pass, the next target, the next small correction, and did not let it expand beyond that. She kept the Vreth exterior support craft off Cole's approach for 40 minutes straight. During those 40 minutes she was hit twice, put a missile into something she was about 90% sure was a fuel relay, watched it go up very brightly, and immediately moved to the next pass without looking back. When Cole's signal came through, a single tone, pre-agreed, meaning the objective was done, she exhaled. She pulled her ship up and looked at the display. The Vreth fleet was moving. Not toward them. She watched it for 3 seconds to make sure. She had been in space long enough that her eyes were not entirely reliable. But the display was clear. The fleet, all 11,000 ships, or close enough, was pulling back. Slowly at first. Then faster. Cole, she said into the comm. I see it, he said. He was still inside the vessel. They're leaving. A pause. Yep, he said. She looked at the display for a while longer. 11,000 ships, bigger than anything humanity had ever put in space, retreating from something smaller than a mid-sized city on Earth. She did not cheer. She did not feel like cheering. She felt like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a long time and had now set it down, and was not yet sure whether her arms still worked. On the flagship, now pulling back with the rest of the fleet, Jacques stood at his viewport and watched the distance grow. The full assault formation had not worked. Not because of the numbers had still been heavily in the Dominion's favor. But numbers, he now understood too late, had not been the variable that mattered. The human units had moved as though they had already decided what the outcome was going to be and were simply completing the steps to get there. Every time his forces blocked one path, there was another path. Every time he expected a pause, there was no pause. There was just the next move. He dictated his after-action report sitting in his command chair while the fleet was still in transit. He had filed 43 of them over his career. All of them brief. All of them clinical. He was known in the Dominion administrative system for his brevity. This one he started 11 times. Each time he started it, he found that the standard language did not work. The standard language had categories for wins and losses and partial engagements and withdrawals. The categories assumed things about the nature of an opponent that did not apply here. He sat for a long time with the blank document in front of him. What he finally wrote was short. It was not clinical. It was something else. Do not engage humanity again. Not for territory. Not for resources. Not for the administrative completion of a sector map. Not for any reason that can be weighed against the cost. We came with 43 campaigns behind us and the certainty that we understood what it meant for a species to fight. We did not. I do not know if it is possible to understand it without experiencing it directly, and experiencing it is not something I recommend. Find another spiral arm. Leave this one alone. He sent it before he could revise it. Velshan read it over his shoulder. She did not say anything. On the hull of the staging vessel, Gwen Harlow watched the fleet disappear on a small portable display she had carried from the forward position. The screen was not large and the resolution was not excellent, and the fleet was just a set of blinking dots shrinking toward the edge of the system. She watched until they were gone. She was still carrying the 3 letters in her pocket, the ones she had written in Geneva before she started making calls, before any of this began. She had given copies to a woman at a desk, but she had kept her own. She took them out now. Held them. She had written them for a version of this moment that had not happened, a version where the math had not worked out, where she had been wrong about what she understood in that basement when the room was arguing and she was calculating. She had been prepared to be wrong. She was very glad she had not been. She put the letters back in her pocket. Cole found her a few minutes later. He looked at the blank display where the fleet had been. Looked at her. Hell of a thing, he said. Gwen Harlow, who spoke in complete sentences as a matter of personal discipline, who had talked warlords down from ledges and failed twice, who had written 3 letters for a version of today that did not come, looked at the empty space where 11,000 ships had been. Yes, she said. It was.